Okay, so I'm going to give, I mean, Vince, this is your first time. Did you have anything in particular that you wanted to chat about or discuss, or are you just checking it out?
I'm really interested in fermentation and kind of new to the coffee world. We're trying to start a roasting company here in San Diego. And one of my questions, and I have a lot of questions, but I'm not going to take over the chat here today. But one question is kind of about the supply chain and how fermentation tends to happen at the farm and producer level mostly. I'm curious what the advantages and disadvantages of that are, and whether people have tried fermentation at other points on the supply chain of coffee, and what the benefits and detriments of that would be.
That's a great question. So I think because of the new attention that we've been giving to fermentation, I think it really leads to your question about, who's it for, who is going to benefit, what are the drawbacks, and that kind of gives the context that this is something that hasn't been happening the whole time, right? So fermentation is the way that coffee has been produced throughout the history of coffee, meaning that microbes found in the environment have been breaking down mucilage and liberating the seed. So I just like to be really clear that everybody all the time is fermenting. Like, it's really hard to find a coffee that hasn't been fermented, because coffee is not produced in sterile places, and so this is something that everybody's participating in. It's not for some special kind of elite. There is What is new and what is innovative is perhaps fermenting with additions of fruit, fermenting with additions of cultures, fermenting with additions of spices, yogurt. There's a lot of new introductions into the coffee fermentation. So that is perhaps new, but because we group that in with fermentation when we're talking, we're like, this new thing, fermentation. It's like, that's how coffee has been produced. So I think the other question was, where where does it happen? And something that we've talked a lot about on the podcast is one of the misconceptions also in early kind of processing is that fermentation was reserved for the tank, for wash process, when the coffee was pulped and you put it in the tank, and that was fermentation. And that meant that honeys and naturals were kind of left out of the equation, saying, oh, those are not fermented because they're not in a tank. Those are on a patio or a raised bed. And our broader understanding is that microbial activity is happening all the time. So just because you're not in a tank in a wet mill doesn't mean you're not fermenting. You're still fermenting if you're on a patio. As long as you've got moisture and you've got microbes, you've got a fermentation. And then we were also expanding that even. So we're like, fermentation tank out to the patio, because there's also a conversation of the beginning stages of drying, you're still fermenting because you have a lot of moisture. You've got, especially on patios, you've got a lot of microbes there. So, like, the first part of drying is still somewhat of a fermentation. But now we're also extrapolating it back to how you can have fermentation as soon as you remove the cherry from the tree. Meaning that at that point, you've removed the cherry from the tree, the seed gets a signal that it's no longer attached. You have microbes on the outside, you have sugar, and you have moisture, and depending on your transportation time. So you can be 12 hours fermenting before you even get to your wet mill to start your 50-hour fermentation. So when does it happen? It can really happen as soon as you detach your seed from the tree, your cherry from the tree. And it can even happen if you're on the tree, if you have something I've seen in places where it's really, really wet and there's a lot of like hydric stress, where the cherries can burst because they're taking up so much water, and so the cherry's still attached to the tree. So it should have a signal that it shouldn't get this metabolism going, but because there's so much water, it'll burst, and now you have again that contact of the microbes on the outside on the skin allowed to be in contact with the sticky mucilage and the sugary sweetness. So you can be fermenting on the tree, you can be fermenting on the way to the wet mill, you are fermenting in your tank, and as well in your patio. So it's something that can happen all along this supply, all along this like different stages. But your other question is there an other step? And yes, I've seen, I don't want to call it a trend because I hope it's not a trend, but I have seen a lot of research and interest in fermenting green coffee. So something that has already removed its mucilage, it's already been dried. The seed is ready to be roasted, and then it is submitted to like a re-fermentation process, meaning it's put in some liquid medium with some sugar, and then there's another opportunity for fermentation. Go ahead. Question?
Which is, yeah, that's exactly what we're playing around with. And but I'm curious about like the benefits and detriments of that for the global coffee community if roasters start fermenting, whether we're taking that away from the producers and that's creating or continuing inequalities or those types of things, or whether it's a benefit for the community. So I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
I love that question because I don't think that that's enough of a concern. I was recently asked, well, not that recently, but a couple months ago, I was asked to review a research paper where this was done. So I think it was Japanese researchers. They took this green coffee and they were trying to prove, they're trying to find the best microbe to re-ferment these green beans. And the research was okay. Ultimately, I can't say who it was because it was rejected and they had to fix a lot of things. But one of the comments that I had was, and I saw, you can see when you are asked to review something, you can see the other reviewers' comments and the other reviewers' like criticisms of the paper. And one of the things that really struck me was every other person that was reviewing the research was really focused on the technicalities of how this research, like it needed more replicates. They just weren't as like rigid in the structure. Like people were really criticizing the structure of the experiment. And no one was really looking at the implications, the ethical implications of what this means. So I pointed out a company that I haven't really kept up with in recent years, but when they first came out, Affineur was doing this. It's a French company. They're, biochemists. They're incredibly skilled in this field, in this area, and they were trying to make like extra nutritious coffee. So by fermenting and like infusing it with more antioxidants and more, I don't know, amino acids, like they were just trying to make like really healthy coffee. But what ended up happening is maybe part of further proof of concept or just kind of limitations. They bought the cheapest coffee they could find. They bought, below market price coffee in, I don't know, Tanzania or something. And then with their process, they were able to make it, it was like $25 for like 10 grams of coffee. Like it was something like incredibly expensive. And so again, it allowed them to buy old crop, past crop, like really deeply discounted coffee where the producers were not being fairly compensated, add value on their end, and then just keep all of that value. So it showed that was kind of like the first use case of this tool. And so your question is like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? It's, the tool is a tool. It depends whose hands it's in. And so the tool has that opportunity to be in those hands, to be in hands of it. It would potentially allow roasters or whoever, to buy even cheaper coffee, even worse coffee, and make it better, add the value themselves outside of origin. So this could be really bad for producers because then we're saying the thing that you've had to add value, you no longer have that. Like the tool that you have to make your coffee unique is now in our hands. I think that's very ethically questionable and not where most of us in specialty want to go. However, I have also seen another use case of it where she was an exporter from Ecuador and she came to one of our fermentation camps and she was interested in it because there were a lot of producers in her area that because of climate change, because of just challenges in the region, their coffee was not at export level quality. It wasn't getting that specialty level. So she wanted to, as the exporter, buy it from them so that this coffee wouldn't just completely go to waste. So she could rescue this coffee and then find a market for it. So it was still processing green coffee, but it was processing green coffee at origin to be able to rescue the crop from some of these producers. So again, like it's a really interesting tool. It just depends who's going to wield it. And I think we're not asking ourselves enough about that. It's just like we get so like romanticized by the cool science of it. Like it's really interesting that you can do these things and change the flavor and that we know these things. And sometimes we're just like going a little too quickly to be like, wait, what what does this mean for everybody else on the supply chain? So I think that, you know, it's something that you can definitely use, and then just think about, you know, you can still do that part at origin as well, and try to maintain some of that value. So I don't know if that has any sparks anything for you or anything else.
No, that definitely helps answer the question. I think we're really interested in exactly what you're talking about, but I'm trying to think of the big picture implications of it on the global coffee community before we dive into that, you know. So, yeah, I appreciate the ethical, advice on that, and I would love any, if there are any protocols we could take as a company in trying to do this that would benefit the coffee community and not be something that creates inequalities along the way. I'd love to, learn from that and make sure that we're being a team player and producing a win-win scenario, and, puffing up our margins by adding value by fermenting.
Yeah, I think something to think about too is, like I said, this technique of re-fermenting green coffee allows a company to save money by buying even cheaper coffee and then fixing it or improving it themselves. Or it could allow you to buy coffee that would normally not satisfy like your quality level, and so it could open the market. So again, like it could be used in a really positive and helpful way to producers to say, right now your coffee's at an 80, it's not quite, you know, in our target, but I'll buy it anyway because I can make it in, you know, in 85. So yeah, just thinking about, or potentially another thing that comes to mind, this may not, I'm not a business person, but I'm imagining maybe you buy the coffee at the price of an 80 and then you can improve it to an 84, 85, and then share back that difference to say like, now your coffee is an 85, your coffee is worth an 85. We had access to some of these other, you know, simple things. And that re-fermentation process, the thing that's nice about doing it on green coffee is because your volume, the coffee seed is so much smaller, you can make that process easier than when you're fermenting cherries that are 6 times the volume and just take up a lot more space. So I think you can more easily kind of access that. I think that's another reason why it's really interesting in research, is that it's really easy to do. It's in small quantities you can make a really big impact. Because the other thing is, one of the things that I talk about for fermentation is kind of fermentation efficiency. So when you're fermenting cherries, you have the exocarp, you have the mesocarp, you have the endocarp, you have all of these tissue layers. You have like, I don't know, 20 tissue layers, and the microbes are on the outside. You want to get the flavor into the seed. When you are fermenting green seeds, you've taken out all of those tissue layers. So you have like a direct injection of flavor. You don't have those like physical barriers. So not only can you have shorter times of fermentation, but you can have a much more dramatic impact on the final flavor. So again, like fermenting green seeds is really interesting because it's so accessible. But again, it leaves us with like, okay, we've already kind of taken advantage of producers in this way. And here's just another thing that we're going to do. So thank you for that question. Super interesting. I'll open it up. Ben, you have your camera on. Where are you from? Where are you based?
Hey, good to be back in after what feels like forever. Um, I'm in Kampala in Uganda. Um, a part of the thing that I love most about my job is that it's really seasonal. So we're about to go into coffee season again. So just my mind starts thinking like get back into the Making Coffee podcast and get back into the Patreon and make sure my credit card details up to date and stuff like that. So don't really come in with big questions. We can just give an update that yeah, we're in Uganda and in the east we're about to start buying coffee cherries. And we've had a really wet couple of years with El Nino this side, so it's been a challenge producing coffee, but we're expecting a really good harvest this year. A lot of very healthy flowerings. So yeah, I'm just here to be a fly on the wall as usual and put the camera on.
No, good to have you back, Ben. It's good to see you. And we have Nick and I are headed to Nick's on my side. I don't know if you guys can see him. Tech guy. We are headed to Kenya at the end of the month. We have like 3 weeks, and we do have some producers from Uganda coming. We have Donna from the Coffee Garden, so it'll be good to see
Amazing.
her again. So we're really excited. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to travel throughout East Africa,
Yeah.
but we know we're going to be back. We know this isn't going to be our only trip.
Yeah. That's so exciting. And whereabouts in Kenya are you going to be?
We're going to Chepsangor, which is in the Nandi Hills. So Chepsangor is
That's
where
really,
the
really amazing.
oh, we're so excited. I'm yeah, very very pumped. All right, so Paolo
Awesome.
did submit a question, and Nick, where can I read that? Just because. Hi, Paolo. Good to see you. I'm gonna read your question because I know you have. Okay, yeah, we're pulling it up.
Where you put it?
No, just kidding. It's not there. So his question was about beer yeast, and it was a really good question, one that I haven't been asked before or haven't been able to address on the podcast. This may be okay. I got it. So Paolo's question is a question for Friday. You've already talked about yeast for beer that want maltose, but how do they behave when they can't find it? Can they consume something else, or do the other microorganisms take over? He's saying he drank this coffee and thought of me. So this is a coffee from Poquete. Actually, Nick, can we put this in the chat? Nick is going to put all of the details so I don't have to read them to you in our Discord chat. But the question is, or not the question, but the premise is that I like to use wine yeast for coffee fermentations because these Saccharomyces are used to glucose, because that's what, coffee cherries are a fruit, grapes are a fruit. So those yeasts that are adapted for wine are a little bit more at home when they're fermenting coffee cherries. The reason I generally don't recommend using beer yeast is because, again, when you're doing, there we go. Yay, okay, so now you can see more of the question and then the information about this particular coffee that Paolo tasted in the chat. So when we're doing, wheat or malt or hops, like all of those grains have a different sugar source. And so the yeast that are adapted to that sugar can be stressed out when now you're feeding them, when now the sugar source is more fruit. So I'm talking about maltose versus sucrose. So sucrose, we have our glucose and our fructose together, and our yeast, the Saccharomyces, really like glucose. That's their preferred food source, and so glucose is readily abundant, so they ferment really well. When we're looking at beer yeast, they're more adapted for maltose, but maltose is two glucoses together. So you might think that it would be much more of a preferred source because you still have the glucose there. The question is just how available it is. So if the sugar source is not as available, meaning that the yeast need to cut that maltose molecule separated into its glucose components. So if it doesn't have enough enzymes to do that, then even though the food is there, it's just going to starve. It's not going to be able to take it in. So depending on, like, the question is like, how would it respond? It really depends on the type of yeast. If their enzyme activity is strong enough to cleave that bond and release the glucose. And this is where like the individual yeast personalities come through, where there are some yeasts that are very aggressive and they're very like survivor, and they have these mechanisms to be able to outcompete their, any other microbes that are present, any other yeast that are present. And then there are other yeasts that are much more docile and much more, I don't know, just gentle. Like they don't have this like aggressive metabolism. And so depending on your yeast, you could either have absolutely no problems and they will be able to cleave that maltose, liberate the glucose and ferment just fine, or it can be a yeast that has the personality that is just not as strong. It could get overwhelmed, and therefore you would inoculate with it, and then nothing would happen because it wouldn't have access to the food source, the sugar source, and something else could absolutely take over. So this coffee, if you can read it, let's see. Recipe for the producer. For this unique lot, we decided to inoculate Deep Pulp Typica with Heliogaser yeast, a strain of yeast largely popular in the craft brewing scene for its ability to produce thiol compounds responsible for highly aromatic beers. To support thiol compounds, 5 pounds of Cascade hops were added to the fermentation, along with 2 liters of fresh wort from the brewery. Fermentation was carried out for 6 days, starting at 18 degrees Celsius and dropping to 15 degrees Celsius towards the end. Parchment was then dried for 14 days until reaching 9% humidity. So this is where it's really related to the earlier question about the tool depends whose hands it's in. So this protocol is incredibly advanced, and they are thinking about making sure that the yeast is well fed and making sure. Did you want to say something, Paolo? Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry. I see. The protocol is the same of the beer. They use the same protocol. Allora, first of all, this is a mystery coffee. Every month we buy a mystery coffee. We have to discover the origin, the variety, and so on. We taste very common flavor, like Central America. I taste nougat, plum, and so nothing special. But the coffee was very expensive. We pay 20 euro for 100 gram. Good for the producer. But when we discovered the origin, the production, we discovered this complicated method that replicate equally the beer production. They use the yeast. This is, if you see the flavor that give in the beer this yeast, you find tropical fruit and so on. They use hop, and they use also the mix of maltosio. During production of the beer, they use maltose. I don't know. This is they use a grain and malt together, no, to give the yeast the food. So complicated production. Result nothing. The explanation was where you talk about this in all the podcast, all the I don't remember where, but you talk about this problem of beer, yeast, and coffee. You have just talking about this. I remember. I don't find the text. I don't find the podcast, but I remember this.
Yeah.
So I say, good for origin. Panama, this producer is Lost Origin. Lost Origin win the last brewer champion world championship with Austrian competitor, but probably they are very smart person to sell everything that they produce. Now, also this coffee that was not exceptional, really unuseful method for me, and so I want to talk with you about this unuseful method.
So, Paolo, my question to you is, it's not that, so the coffee itself, you liked it, but it did not match what you thought it would be given this extensive protocol. So it was not in alignment with what you expected from a protocol like this. But it's not that it was bad, right? It just wasn't.
No, I don't expect nothing. It was, I think this is only marketing. because they make a video in the Discord of the Mystery Coffee when they explain the complicated method, but the result was unuseful for me. It was a normal wash Central America coffee. It's nothing. Is nothing. When I say Central America, I say nothing. I know, but see market expectation about Central America, plum, nougat, and so on. But I say the complication in this production was, for me, very complicated because they use a protocol for the beer, okay, but they put also hop. This is the complication because hop bring many microorganisms together. It is a very mess for me. It is a very complication situation because you use a method that don't match with the coffee. This is my thing.
Yeah, I
But
think
you
that's
put
really
hop.
interesting. So I have many thoughts about this, and I'm glad you jumped in with your comments, because what I was initially going to say is that this tool of using beer yeast, I generally don't recommend because it's so finicky. It's difficult to do well because the yeast are very high maintenance because you're putting them in a situation that they're not that accustomed to. So for me, beer yeast is already a challenge for the coffee. Then I was going to say, but I know Lost Origin, and I know they do have a brewing facility. I've tasted their beers. Their beers taste really great. I really like their beers. So these are
They
people.
produce beer. They produce beer.
Yeah. So in the
Ah,
chat you can see pictures of my last visit to Lost Origin. So they have the best equipment. They have the best sanitation. They steam everything. So the level of hygiene is incredible. And then you can see they're using these little tanks for their coffee fermentation. So that's coffee in the little tanks, and then also on the sorting on the table that you can see there, kind of wide, we were sorting and adding microbes so that we can get really good contact. So in this situation, this is like the best case scenario of what you need to make these beer yeast happy, to keep them healthy, to make sure that you are out competing, that you're not getting contamination or any other challenges. So I was going to say this tool, it really requires a lot of effort and it requires a lot of maintenance. And what's interesting to me is, Paolo, as you're saying, you don't feel like it was reflected in the coffee. It was a lot of effort, like a lot of show, a lot of circus for not the result in the cup. So I think that's interesting. I
yes.
haven't had their coffee in
Yes.
a long time.
Yes.
So again, I agree with, it's kind of funny. The coffee, I'm sure, is expensive, but because of the facilities that they have to maintain, I don't even know if they're really
It's
making as
expensive
much.
for the marketing. They
It
make marketing. They talk a lot about nothing. The people buy this coffee because we are stupid. Sorry, we coffee lovers are stupid. These are very complicated, but they talking about nothing. No, they could put everything in the tank. Also, kefir. Yeast it was the same. No, they talk about a story. They say the story. This is the fact. But the most interesting thing is that it, we still buy this coffee. You know, I never want to have a similar coffee. So
I hear you.
is it very interesting for me this coffee is interesting to understand the situation that are in the coffee. No, we think all the amount for the coffee and so on. But the situation is very silly. No, is we buy expensive coffee and we have nothing.
I hear you.
This is my idea.
I think that in this situation, yeah, it's not a good fit for you. It was the translation, and I think that's definitely where producers need to be aware that some people are buying coffees for the description. Some people are buying coffees based on what it says and like the promise of something different. And I think, Paolo, for your situation, you are a very experienced taster. You seek these coffees out, you've had a lot of experience, so you know that this is not anything out of the ordinary of what you've tasted. But I think for somebody else who's less experienced, they could have a good cupping experience with this coffee, and like listening to the story, because I think the story is a big part of it.
Was not with in the mystery. You don't taste the production. You taste a blind coffee. You don't know what you are tasting, and so the people say is a terrible coffee. I was thinking, they say I was expensive, but was nothing. I was talking about Australia. I was talking about Hawaii, a strange region, but expensive for European. I think because a normal coffee. Instead, they sell the style of fermentation. This is the situation.
Paolo, can you tell me more about?
My problem is that I know you because I follow Lucia for 3 years, 4 years, and I listen all the day your post. And so when I read the protocol of Panama, I laugh because they connect thermal shock with co-fermenting. They say that we don't want nothing. What thermal shock is the two temperature, and you don't want thermal shock, but they are talking about Bermudas. They don't want the situation of Bermuda, but they don't know because don't follow Lucia. They don't know that thermal shock is only two temperature. And so there is a mix of confusion in coffee now. Everything is talking about fermentation, but nothing, nothing. This is sorry for my English. Sorry.
It's always a pleasure to have you, Paolo.
I want to talk like my problem with English.
Well, the other thing I will say about this that is maybe something that we're missing is I'm looking at the description again and seeing that it's down to 9% humidity, which I'm surprised to see because that feels quite low. I think that we know that this yeast does produce these thiols if it has the proper nutrition and the conditions. And thiols are these really great fruity flavors that give us a lot of excitement in the cup. So it could be possible that their drying methods are just not in alignment with their fermentation. And by drying it a little too far, then some of those flavors just kind of are trapped there and they weren't able to be expressed in the coffee. So I think
you want to give an excuse to the lost origin. You want
we're being generous here.
Excuse. Probably is the dry phase. No, is that I don't think so. You are a friend of Lost Origin, I understand.
I am a friend of theirs, and I do want to be generous. But I do think that a lot of times we forget about drying, and we take drying for granted.
If all the producer was with the mind of these people, the producer were all rich. This is my idea.
Yeah, Panama, when we talk about Panama, it needs to be its own category because it's so different from what we're talking about most of the time here when we're talking about Guatemala or Colombia or Honduras or Uganda. Panama is its own beast. So I think it's really hard for the rest of the world to look at Panama and learn anything or borrow anything because it's so inaccessible. I mean, even looking at these pictures, the level of infrastructure and equipment and investment is just miles away.
Yes.
And the quantities are tiny, right? They're making tiny lots that just don't make sense.
There is a problem in Panama. There is a problem because the silly mind like me, the cosiddetti so-called coffee lovers stop buying the expensive Panama. We 4 years ago, everybody want to have Panama, but now this trend is finished. Everybody want Colombia now, the big farm that produces the grid fermentation, the grid the new coffee and exceptional winner and so on. And so the problem that by in Panama they are very afraid that they are losing their faith. They are losing mind. In fact, this protocol that they don't want so is for this reason. 2-3 years ago, they don't think about this protocol because they sell everything, and that does in this moment is finished. This the rich moment for Panama, and so they are afraid. And this is the result also. They start to make a confusion, and this is the problem.
Yeah, they're doing a lot.
Also,
I
if
could see
beer.
that theory of being concerned, and a lot of the initial responses, well, let's do more to justify these prices or to justify our coffee. And what's interesting, Paolo, is that you're saying in Colombia that like that's where the focus has turned to these coffees. But I was talking to an importer yesterday, and he was telling me that most of his customers, the roasters who usually buy Colombian coffees, are actually less interested in Colombian coffees now because they just want like a more traditional coffee flavor. And now going to Colombia means you're going to get a lot of funky coffees. And so more people that used to buy from Colombia are actually going to Peru because Peru still hasn't been touched by a lot of these crazy fermentations. And so most of his customers are just wanting clean, washed, bright coffees. So it's interesting to see. I think the market and these trends are not really aligned. I think there's like a mismatch.
There are two words. We are talking about two words. This is the free market, very big, enormous, that spend a lot of money. And this is the small market of crazy coffee lover. They are talking about stupid thing all the day. This word, this small word of the specialty is now want Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are many farms, many famous farms, Los Nogales, La Esperanza, a lot of. They produce incredible coffee, but there are not the old fermented, terrible of 5 years ago. They are clean, complex, good variety, good fermentation, incredible. This is Colombia. Uh, every year you find new coffee, new flavor, and so on. It's incredible, Colombia.
Thank you for sharing. Actually, I'm going to call
Sorry,
on.
sorry,
No, no,
stop
no.
talking.
I think this is really
My
interesting.
terrible English.
And no, it's always a pleasure to have you. I love the allora. I gotta learn my
Allora,
I'm gonna pick on Victor if he's around, because I'm curious to get another consumer perspective on this type of coffee. Hey, Victor, good to see you. I'm curious if this coffee. So, whatever you want to say, but question for you is: having listened to some of this discussion with Paolo and you being a coffee nerd, does this type of coffee interest you? Is this something that you would buy, or do you feel? I feel like Paolo feels betrayed by this coffee.
Make sure I understand the type of coffee we're talking about too. I was having some audio troubles and I didn't catch everything.
It's on the chat. So if you can open up the chat and see and read the description of the coffee. So it's fermented with beer yeast and it has a whole protocol with hops added.
Find the chat button. Okay. Yes. Well, to put it simply, I'll try anything once. So absolutely, if for me, particularly because I'm trying to like taste the widest world of coffee available, if there's something new to me, then I will buy it and taste it. Whether I would go back for it again then becomes the question.
So what is like your daily driver right now? What are you into drinking?
These are what I've been working through.
Prodigal? Yes, of course.
Yeah, no surprise there. Um, So to kind of summarize, like somewhere in that realm of like it's got some interesting flavor characters. It's not just like your down the middle washed coffee, but not like extreme funk, pretty much. I know that probably doesn't help much.
No, I think it's
Uh,
interesting to have that
Can
idea.
you show me again the coffee, please? What coffee are you drinking?
So
Prodigal.
this one from Prodigal, I think Scott is just so good at marketing to people
Scott
like
Rao.
me.
This is Scott Rao.
Scott Rao, yeah.
Will process wash is a normal and a wash. This is a wash, no?
Yeah.
Sorry, is
Most
a Sidra. Is a Sidra. This.
exactly, and that was I think one of the appeal for this because I hadn't had Sidra in a long time. So yeah, looking for
But the
the
flavor is
varietal.
red apple.
Say
The
again?
flavor is red apple.
Red apple.
Yeah, red apple caramel floral. That's not exactly what I've been getting out of it, but I have been messing with like a lot of like I also drink mostly espresso, by the way.
This is
And
using espresso. You
I
using
am
espresso this coffee.
yes, I have been mainly
Ah,
making espresso out of these. I do cup everything when I get it, and so usually I'll order a couple bags, cup them all, pick one to keep on bar, and then freeze the remainder to come back to.
hmm.
Um, but you know, I have like do y'all know on Instagram the Cool Roast Curves account?
Should we?
Okay, you should be following Lucia. Cool Roast Curves is a roaster, a guy
Sorry.
who roasts down in SoCal, but he is meme lord, just like crazy coffee
I
memes.
believe.
And a lot of things probably won't make sense to people who aren't deeply in like internet culture and like just weird people like me. But he has started doing his own roasts and packaging in VHS tapes with like
Are you live?
super
Where
weird
you buy this
description.
coffee?
Buy online. I'm like pretty much at this point 90% purchasing online.
But this is from USA.
Yes.
Ah, hmm.
It's easier than ever for people to just create a Shopify store and do, you know,
Market is different in Europe, very different. We have problem with the USA. Probably you don't taste the European coffee. So for us, for my experience, USA coffee is more darker than European expectation. For example, Prodigal for me is good, but it's good, but sorry.
I have had Regalia coffee before, um, through a tasting pack, and coffee with Carly, the cherry coffee. Do you, there's a woman in the Netherlands who has started like monthly tasting service that would be very interesting to me, but is very expensive to get from the Europe to the US. So I haven't
This is a
done
problem,
that
no?
yet. Um,
Yeah, and Victor, feel free to use the chat. Maybe if you could take a picture of the coffee bags
Yes,
so we can
better.
see.
sure.
I like Scott's. The Prodigal that I've had, I've always really liked. I think my American palate is very much kind of on that side of preference.
Oh no,
I will say,
they are incredible coffee, Prodigal, good coffee, but also Scott explained why he chose this kind of coffee, this kind of roasting style, and so there is many explanation why he roasts in this way and why he sells this kind of coffee. This is the situation. I don't want to criticize Scott Rao, but there is a reason in Scott Rao. He explained exactly why. So for us it's difficult, but we find this coffee, sorry, rather normal. We are not in search of crazy. But crazy normal. There's a crazy normalization. These are complicated.
So this Cool Roast Curves looks for oddball coffee, so I'll try to put a link to that. The only other thing I was gonna say is I'm kind of burnt out on geisha, um, or it's not really even my favorite coffee. Um, to me, a lot of times it tastes like Earl Grey tea, or it just doesn't deliver on expectations. That could be my preparation, but I've
Geisha
been
from where geisha?
usually Colombia, it seems like.
This is a problem.
I don't know that I've had like the true Panamanian. So maybe
Now
not.
you find a lot of geisha in specialty. You find a lot of geisha of all price, also very cheap price. You find a lot of geisha from all over the world, Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, but is full
Yeah.
of geisha. But the quality, I collect the bean of all the coffee that I buy. No, I arrive at 600 coffee, different coffee. I have the bean of 600 coffee. Crazy man. If you watch the geisha that I have, very different. Now there is also an explanation why the variety of geisha now sometimes they sell some plants that are not connected with geisha or low quality geisha. So if you watch the Panama geisha is the size of the bean is one. When you watch to the other geisha is very different. We don't talk about Ethiopian geisha. Geisha Ethiopia is very with the point long. So this is a perfect geisha. Panama geisha is more round, and the other is confused. It's very confused. The situation also Lucia explained this with a conversation. No, it was not Lucia. It was Lisa Farr, talking. Was talking with a producer. They say they sometimes they sell plants that are of not good quality. This is the problem.
Definitely. I will share with you one thing. Oh, wait. Oh, before I share what I was going to share
Sorry
with you about
for the
counterfeiting.
talking, Lucia. Now is the I stop.
No, don't worry, Paolo. I just wanted to welcome Margot. It's good to see you. And does this mean that your lamb had successful surgery, or is that later today?
So hey guys. Sorry. Shh. So we actually delayed it. He's still alive and he's still okay. I breed this really like rare sheep, and the mom absolutely mauled one of her babies and broke his ribs and punctured his lung, and yeah.
That is frightening.
So, anyway.
Did you
Yeah, but
witness?
he's too small. They can't do the surgery yet. So
Oh,
yeah, I know.
did you witness it, or did you just kind of find the aftermath of it?
I witnessed sort of the beginning and then kind of turned my back and then saw I was milking the other sheep. So,
Ugh.
yeah. So anyway, it's a bummer because he's worth a lot of money, and obviously he's cute and little, but yeah. So,
Is there
and we're
anything?
still waiting for our processing equipment to arrive from Colombia. It's been floating in the LA port for, I don't know, maybe a month now. So that's cool.
Wow. So how long is from when you like place the order? How long has it been?
How long has it? Oh my gosh, my dogs are fighting. It's we ordered in December, right after I saw you.
Okay. Well, I'll just share with the group. Margot is in California, and
All right.
there you are.
I had to lock him out.
So it's been 9 months.
Yeah, 9 months. Yeah. So long time. But I guess Colombia's had issues with weather and whatnot. But yeah, it took 9 months and we still don't have it to get equipment. So hopefully, but it's okay. I mean, our volume this year is very low, and we've been using a lot of the cherries to create more seedlings. We've what we actually did harvest, the Lorena was super dense, had like 5% floaters and whatever, but that was the variety we were planning to pull out. So that's great. And the Pacamara had 85% floaters. So yeah.
That's a surprise because the Laurina is usually the more finicky, difficult.
Right. And if you look at the trees, they're tiny and they really have not thrived, and we don't have enough of them. And now that I've seen the size of the true seed, like they're very difficult to roast, and there's just a million reasons why we want to take them out, but and replace them with other things. But yeah, I talked to somebody at UC Davis who about the nutrition of it, and the thing is that in our Lorena, we ran our chickens through it for probably 2 months this past fall, and but the Pacamaro we did not, and that was the difference between 5%
Wow.
defect rate versus 85% defect rate. So it has given us some information about how to fix our nutrition issues for sure. Yeah.
And have you done soil testing? Have you sent out samples?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Soil testing, foliar testing, the whole thing, and it actually doesn't show that any of it's bad. So the fact that the coffee doesn't float, yeah, it's just not. I mean, it does float. Yeah. So we're still figuring that out, but the chicken manure has been a pretty big clue as to why. And as far as I know, I'm the only person in California doing this because everybody's been having these floating issues with nutrition problems. And as far as I know, we're the only person that had that kind of defect rate on areas where we actually ran the chickens. So I just bought another 100 chickens.
I was just gonna say, is a problem not having enough chickens? Is that why you didn't do it on both?
Yeah, we didn't have enough at the time. So it was more of a pilot program, and we really wanted to separate it and see, because we did the foliar test between the two blocks, and it did. It showed that there was a lot more nutrition in the areas where we ran the chickens. And but we weren't really sure how it was going to go. So we just did it on the one because it was the saddest looking block, really, because it's really sad looking. And sort of a last ditch effort to see what happened, but then it like made it amazing. I still am going to rip it out. I mean, just because it's not, I don't think it's viable as like a commercial product, but it was good information.
Cool. And remind me, do you have multiple canopies? Do you have shade trees in your coffee farm?
So, yes and no. We have added a lot, but they're not super tall yet. We've got ingas, we've got avocados and bananas primarily. So, but like the Lorena, there's just, I mean, although we're trying to grow these things next to it, there's just literally no shade, just total sun. And the Pacamara has more shade, the one that had a huge amount of defects. So go figure.
And was it mostly
So-
insect damage that you noticed that was causing the floaters, or was it like poor development?
They look beautiful. They look beautiful. So, but if you open them up, just not both seeds were developed.
Okay.
So, but you couldn't tell that from the outside. I mean, they were perfectly, and they're picked at the perfect rape time, and they looked gorgeous. But yeah, when you float them, you get a lot of floaters. So, yeah. So that's why I've been looking to import and Catuai from Brazil and Pacamara from El Salvador, because that's where the trees originally came from. So yeah.
I'm wondering because
I just
you have.
want to throw out there.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Victor.
Sorry, if you grow cherimoya at your farm, you can count me as a customer. So if you're looking for new commercial crops,
yeah, I planted one cherimoya tree. I actually used to think it was kind of gross, but I tried one that wasn't from the grocery store, and it turns out they're actually really good. So yeah. So yeah, cherimoya does grow well here, but it's actually very labor intensive, and I feel like we've kind of checked that box on labor intensive with the coffee.
Okay.
I'm not sure we're super game to add more labor intensive products. But they are good. I agree. Really yummy.
I
So,
like a cherimoya as well. We
yeah.
we were on the bottom of the farm. If you guys remember where the patio. So sorry to the group. Margot's been to the farm and Victor has been to the farm as well. So where we hold the workshops. And so down past the patio, we found like 2 or 3 just wild cherimoya trees, but because they're wild, so like we found the
Yeah.
fruits, but they taste terrible because like no one's paying attention to them, and they're just, so I just have these like dreams of like maybe this year is like we'll try to get some seeds and bring it up here, but
Yeah.
I was like super excited because I do love that fruit, and then it tasted terrible where it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's true for most wild fruit, It's pretty rare to actually find a fruit that is just doing its own thing and it also tastes good.
Yeah. I want to say one thing to Margot, and then, well, actually, first, Michael, you just turned on your video, so I don't know if you have a question or you want to pop into the group.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Not really, I just wanted to have a problem. No, actually, yeah, one question. I'm curious, what kind of food are you talking about?
Oh, yeah.
I don't
So
know it.
Nick will. Okay. Victor, can you pop in a picture in the chat of a cherimoya?
Oh,
Absolutely.
they're
It's
very.
in the same family as the soursop, guanabana,
Mhm.
bunch of different names for
Mhm.
similar family of fruit.
Yeah. They're very ugly.
They are ugly.
Scares a lot of people away. Yeah. Yeah. I can see why it hasn't really taken off because it's, pretty
But
unattractive.
Margot, my question for you was, because you happen to be in California, because of like your location, and you have this fruit that the seed is not like the seed is what we want for coffee, but because that's the thing that's giving you trouble, I'm wondering if you could partner, if you've thought about partnering with anybody to then use the mucilage to distill and make some alcohol, or you can do cascara, like you can try to use the other parts of the fruit because the seed is kind of disappointing you.
Yes, the answer to that is yes. We have a freeze dryer that just arrived for the cascara, and there's a place that actually wants to use the flour. So we're looking at
Excellent.
that. And then, and I haven't figured out whether you use like floater seeds that like in chocolate or anything like that. I'm not sure whether if you would just burn. I'm not, but it's something I'm looking into. And then, that's interesting you mentioned alcohol because I mean we have a vineyard also, and my vineyard guy was just here and he said he asked me to keep the fermentation water because he wants to try to make alcohol out of it. Have you tried it? Does it work?
So you would need to distill it. The highest alcohol that you can really get with your fermentation water is maybe like a 4%, maybe 5 if you had some additions. So it wouldn't be terribly interesting until you would distill it and get something
Yeah.
more stable. Because that's the other problem. If it's that low alcohol, it's not a very stable product.
Oh, and it's probably not too interesting to the alcohol market either.
Right.
In the United
It's
States.
kind of this like weird middle ground of like not enough alcohol to be interesting, not enough alcohol to be stable. It is something that maybe you could integrate into your farm as bioethanol, as like a fuel, not necessarily a consumable. I think that could work.
I'm sure the state of California would love that. Yeah. Interesting. I'm gonna write that down. So it's about 4% and stable, not stable. Okay.
Just because of the low
But, I mean,
alcohol. So like with beer,
does it
like
taste
breweries.
horrendous?
What's that?
Like, I mean, does it taste horrendous?
No. No,
Oh, really?
I would liken it to like tepache, like the fermented pineapple drink. I think you could get something like along those lines.
Huh. So have you ever tried like putting like some sort of juice with it or like make it,
I haven't, but
something different?
I haven't, but I think you
Huh?
could. I think you could to try and just get that alcohol content up a little bit higher. But
Yeah.
Margot, the other thing that occurs to me, again, because of your location, is those seeds that are not developed and not viable for coffee. I think maybe you could still use those as like a caffeine extract, like collect those seeds and
Ah. No,
either
that had not occurred Okay. Kind of like stevia, or no, not stevia, that's a sugar, like yerba mate stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting.
Th-
Huh.
There's got to
Yeah.
be a local kombucha maker too, who you can give them
Yeah, make
your
hard kombucha.
fermentation effluent and
Yeah.
say, add this to your kombucha. You can sell it to the hippies at the farmers market.
Oh yeah.
You can
Yeah, we
sell
got a lot of,
California hippies just about anything.
well, I mean, this is California, so we got kombucha at the wazoo here.
Just
So,
figure out the probiotic gimmick of the
yes.
coffee ferment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the whole funny thing about the Cuscato, right? Because it's supposed to be a little bit, like it's, you have antioxidants and all that kind of stuff in it. I mean, I don't know how healthy it is for you truly, but people are interested in it as just, it's a marketing line pretty much. Yeah. So, but I mean, I think we're going to have to look at other alternatives of things to do with the stuff that doesn't work. Because, I mean, to have a ton, well, we're going to have a lot of volume next year. I mean, we have flowers right now, so I think we're going to have a fair amount of volume. So we need to be able to figure out what to do with it if it all floats. So, yeah.
Do you have public open farm days or tours or anything like that?
We do, and that's part of, I think, really where we might make our money back is in the ecotourism, the agro-tourism kind of stuff. So, and we're getting our winery license, so I think we might do like a wine and coffee thing kind of notion. So,
I
yeah.
can't wait to come.
Yeah, I think you're gonna
I
have
can't
a
wait
lot
to
of
have it.
people knocking on your door.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you can make
Yeah,
more money selling the novelty of seeing coffee trees and
that's
smelling coffee
definitely.
flowers.
Yeah, I know it is definitely true. And I think that may be where we end up and just showing the processing, and because people love that kind of stuff. And most people don't have the opportunity to fly down to Guatemala for a week and learn how to process coffee. So yeah, so it'll be great when our equipment finally arrives. I mean, not surprisingly, it's in the United States, a shipping container from Colombia definitely gets the once over, twice over, four times over to make sure, with x-rays and whatever, make sure it's not
Of
has other
course.
things in.
Well,
Yeah.
actually, even on this call, not just Victor, but Vince, who's also on the call, is in San Diego, so he's also your
Oh,
neighbor,
nice. Oh, nice. Hi.
and roasting coffee. So
Oh, really? Oh, cool. Well,
yeah,
we're looking to get a stronghold roaster, so I'm excited to give that a go.
Awesome.
Hey,
Nice to meet you.
nice to meet you too.
so yeah, definitely
Yeah.
connect after the chat.
Tell
But this
me
past
your
by
name. Your name again? The one from San Diego?
Vince.
Vince. Okay, I see it.
yeah,
Yeah.
Vince Larson.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, we are out of time. Thanks everybody for hanging out.
I finally made it.
You finally made it.
Yeah.
No, it was a really, you missed a good discussion. Jill, thanks for joining. Hope next time we'll pop in and say hi. And yeah, thanks everybody for your time. If you missed the really fascinating discussion from the beginning, the replay will be up later today or tomorrow, maybe soon. As soon as Nick gets to it. All right. Thanks everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you. Bye.